This is Chapter 7, Part B, Touching Our Suffering, a chapter in The Heart of the Buddha's Teaching by Thich Nhat Hanh. The fourth kind of nutriment is consciousness. Our consciousness is composed of all the seeds sown by our past actions and the past actions of our family and society. Every day, our thoughts, words, and actions flow into the sea of our consciousness and create our body, mind, and world. We can nourish our consciousness by practicing the four immeasurable minds of love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. Or we can feed our consciousness with greed, hatred, ignorance, suspicion, and pride. Our consciousness is eating all the time, day and night, and what it consumes becomes the substance of our life. We have to be very careful which nutriments we ingest, and there's a footnote that I'm going to read. In the year 255, Vietnamese meditation master Thang Hoi taught that our consciousness is like the ocean, with the 6 rivers of our senses flowing into it. Our mind and our body come from consciousness. They are formed by ourselves and our environment. Our life can be said to be a manifestation of our consciousness. Because of the food that our consciousness consumes, we are the person we are, and our environment is what it is. In fact, the edible foods we take into our body and the foods of sense impression and intention all end up in our consciousness. Our ignorance, hatred, and sadness all flow back to the sea of consciousness. We should know the kinds of foods we feed our consciousness every day. When Vijnana consciousness ripens, it brings forth a new form of life, Nama-rupa, which is mind-body. Rupa is our body or physical aspect, and Nama is our mind or mental aspect. Body and mind are manifestations of our consciousness, and our consciousness is made of these kinds of food. We have to look at the 5 aggregates, the skandhas, in us: form, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. They are Nama Rupa. The first of the 5 aggregates is Rupa, and the other 4 are Nama. They are all products of our Alaya Vijnana, our store consciousness. That's the end of that very interesting footnote. I'll return to the text now. The Buddha offered another dramatic image to illustrate this. A dangerous murderer was captured and brought before the king. The king sentenced him to death by stabbing. Take him to the courtyard and plunge 300 sharp knives through him. At noon, a guard reported, "Majesty, he is still alive." And the king declared, "Stab him 300 more times." In the evening, the guard again told the king, "Majesty, he is not yet dead." So the king gave the third order, "Plunge the 300 sharpest knives in the kingdom through him." Then the Buddha said, "This is how we usually deal with our consciousness. Every time we ingest toxins into our consciousness, it is like the stabbing ourselves with 300 sharp knives. We suffer, and our suffering spills out to those around us. When we practice the first turning of the first noble truth, we recognize suffering as suffering. If we are in a difficult relationship, we recognize This is a difficult relationship. Our practice is to be with our suffering and take good care of it. When we practice the first turning of the second noble truth, we look deeply into the nature of our suffering to see what kind of nutriments we have been feeding it. How have we lived in the last few years, in the last few months, that has contributed to our suffering? We need to recognize and identify the nutriments we ingest and observe. When I think like this, or speak like that, listen like this, or act like that, my suffering increases. Until we begin to practice the second noble truth, we tend to blame others for our unhappiness. Looking deeply requires courage. You can use a pencil and paper if you like. During sitting meditation, if you see clearly a symptom of your suffering, write it down. Then ask yourself, what kind of nutriments have I been ingesting that have fed and sustained this suffering? When you begin to realize the kind of nutriments you have been ingesting, you may cry. Use the energy of mindfulness all day long to be truly present, to embrace your suffering like a mother holding her baby. As long as mindfulness is there, you can stay with the difficulty. Practice does not mean using only your own mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. You also have to benefit from mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom of friends on the path and your teacher. There are things that even a child can see, but we ourselves cannot see because we are imprisoned by our notions. Bring what you have written to a friend and ask for his or her observations and insights. If you sit with a friend and speak openly, determined to discover the roots of your suffering, eventually you will see them clearly. But if you keep your suffering to yourself, it might grow bigger every day. Just seeing the causes of your suffering lessens your burden. Sariputra, one of the Buddha's great disciples, said, "When something takes place, if we look at it deeply in the heart of reality, seeing its source and the food that nourishes it, we are already on the path of liberation. When we are able to identify our suffering and see its causes, we will have more peace and joy, and we are already on the path to liberation." In the second stage of the second noble truth, encouragement, we see clearly that real happiness is possible if we can stop ingesting the nutriments that cause us to suffer. If we know that our body is suffering because of the way we eat, sleep, or work, we vow to eat, sleep, or work in ways that are healthier. We encourage ourselves to put an end to the cause of our suffering. Only by a strong intention not to do things in the same way can we keep the wheel in motion. Mindfulness is the energy that can help us stop. We investigate the kind of nutriments we now ingest and decide which ones to continue to eat and which ones to resist. We sit and look together with our friends, with our family, and as community. Mindfulness of ingestion, protecting the body and mind, protecting our families, society, and the environment are important topics for us to discuss. When we direct our attention towards our suffering, we see our potential for happiness. We see the nature of suffering and the way out. That is why the Buddha called suffering a holy truth. When we use the word suffering in Buddhism, we mean the kind of suffering that can show us the way out. There are many practices that can help us face our suffering, including mindful walking, mindful breathing, mindful sitting, mindful eating, mindful looking, and mindful listening. One mindful step can take us deep into the realization of beauty and joy in us and around us. Tran Thai Tong, a great meditation master of the 13th century Vietnam, said, "With every step, you touch the ground of reality." If you practice mindful walking and deep listening all day long, that is Four Noble Truths in action. When the cause of suffering has been seen, healing is possible. We vow to refrain from ingesting foods that make us suffer, and we also vow to ingest foods that are healthier and wholesome. In the third turning of the wheel of the second noble truth, realization, we not only vow, but we actually stop ingesting the nutriments that create our suffering. Some people think that to end suffering, you have to stop everything: body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. But that is not correct. The third stage of the second noble truth can be described as, when hungry, I eat. When tired, I sleep. When someone has realized this stage, she has certain lightness and freedom. What she wants to do is fully in accord with the mindfulness trainings, and she does nothing to cause herself or others harm. Confucius says, "At 30, I was able to stand on my own feet. At 40, I had no more doubts. At 50, I knew the mandate of earth and sky. At 60, I could do what I wanted without going against path." The last of the 10 ox-herding pictures in the Zen tradition is called "Entering the Marketplace with Open Hands." You are free to come and go as you please. This is the action of non-action. Suffering no longer arises. This stage is not something you can imitate. You have to reach the stage of realization within yourself. At the end of the 19th century in Vietnam, Master Nhat Dinh asked the king for permission to retire from being abbot of a national temple so he could live in a mountain hut and take care of his aging mother. Many officials made offerings to the master and begged him to found another temple, but he preferred to live simply in great peace and joy. One day his mother fell ill and needed fish to eat. He went down to the marketplace, asked some vendors for a fish, and carried it back up the mountain. Onlookers asked, "What is a Buddhist monk doing with a fish?" But someone of Master Nhat Dinh's realization could do as he pleased without going against the precepts. At the third stage of the second noble truth, you not only have to be yourself, you only have to be yourself. The form is not important, but be careful. There has to be genuine insight, genuine freedom. And that is the end of this chapter.